Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. This is our second event. We appreciate everybody coming here. If you want to drop in the comments, if it's your first time here or where you're from, we would love to find out. Do want to let you know that this is a public meeting, so there's no guarantee that information or identity is confidential, and that we do record this and it is shared on our YouTube channel. So if you have a question that you want the answer to, but you don't want to be the one to ask it, you can message me through the chat function and I will be glad to ask it for you. You can put your questions in chat, you can raise your hand on screen, or you can use the raised hand icon, whichever works easiest for you in your setup. So with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Joyce Maguire Pavao. She holds a doctorate in education, is a licensed clinical social worker, and a licensed marriage and family therapist. She was the founder and CEO of the Center for Family Connections Incorporated in Cambridge and New York, the founder and director of Riverside After Adoption Consulting and Training, PACT, Pre and Post Adoption Consulting and Training, and Pavao Consulting and Coaching. Dr. Pavao has done extensive training both nationally and internationally. She is a lecturer in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, and she has consulted to various public and private child welfare agencies, adoption agencies, schools, and community groups, as well as probate and family court judges, lawyers, and clergy. Additionally, she's worked closely with individuals and families touched by adoption, foster care, and other complex blended family constructions. She has developed models for treatment and models for training using her systematic intergenerational and developmental framework, the Normative Crises in the Development of the Adoptive Family. Her book, The Family of Adoption, has received high acclaim, and it's available on Amazon, should you choose to read it. And Dr. Pavao has received many awards and honors, including the Children's Bureau, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Adoption Excellence Award for Family Contribution in 2003, and the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Award for Angels in Adoption in 2000. Welcome, Joyce. We're so happy to have you. And I know last time we just kind of jumped right into it. Everybody was excited to get going. I think we had that may the force be with you energy and everything, but I know we had some questions last time, and I was wondering if you could start off telling everyone a little bit about your story and how you ended up doing all this wonderful work that you do.
Sure. Just give me the hook if I go too long on this and it's too boring for everyone. But let's see. I was adopted at 10 days old, but I wasn't adopted. It was said that I was, but legally, I was born August 20th, 1946. And my adoption legalization was August 30th, 1947. So I was placed in my adopted family's home 10 days after I was born, but I wasn't legally adopted for a year, which was typical back in those days. And nobody talked, I was born in the 1940s, mid to late 40s. And so in the 50s, nobody talked about anything. You didn't say the word cancer out loud. You didn't say the word asthma out loud. It was just filled with secrecy. And no one talked to children in any way that would help them to understand anything at all. So although I was told I was adopted, and my Aunt Adeline loves to tell the story, or she did before she passed on, about how she was there the day that I was told. And I ran outside and told everyone that I was adopted. I had no idea what it meant, I'm sure. I think I was 3. But I was a curious person, and in every way, weird curious and curious wondering. But I really felt like I needed to know more than people were telling me. So I was constantly asking questions and constantly not getting answers. And it was very, very frustrating. My mother used to blame it on my red hair. She would say that I had a temper and I had this curiosity because of my red hair. She never suggested it was because of adoption. But to me, I knew it was. I knew this was really weird what people were alluding to, but not saying. Um, so fast forward, you know, there's so much to fill in the middle, but basically I started to want to know who I was and where I came from. And I started asking and asking and asking and not getting answers. And I needed to know. I just needed to know. So finally, when I was in my late teens, a slightly older friend from school went to law school. And I said to her, "Oh, good, now you can help me find out who I am." And she said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm adopted, and there must be some evidence of where I came from and who I was before I was me." And she said, "They don't teach us that in law school, Joyce." And I said, "Well, figure it out. Help me out here, girl." So she went ahead and we approached a judge. This was way back. Nobody else was doing this. I didn't know anyone else who ever searched. And we went to the only female judge in Cambridge, Massachusetts, at the probate and family court, and asked her for access to my original birth certificate and my records. And she said, "Of course." And so she just handed them over to me. And she told me I couldn't take them out of the court building, but that I could go into another room. In those days, you couldn't get out your phone and take a picture of them. So I jotted down as many notes as I could. And I had finally had some information. I finally knew what my name was prior to my adopted name. And I finally knew when I was born so I could do my horoscope. So these were all the things that, were important to me as a teenager and that I wanted to know. So I don't want to go into this really deeply. Feel free to ask me any questions and I'm happy to answer. I just don't want to take up all your time with my story. But I think that going through that led me to, I was going to go to medical school and I was planning on being a doctor. I didn't know what kind. And when I went through this process, I realized that I was interested in psychology and psychiatry, and that I really felt like if I didn't know anything and I had pushed myself and done all this research on my own, what about other people? Why was this such a secret thing? And I used to say it's like being in the witness protection program for the FBI. Your name was changed and you were placed in this secret place where no one could find you. And the only people that were in witness protection were people who had either observed a terrible crime and were needed as witnesses, or who were in danger, in severe danger. So what did that say about us? What did that mean in terms of adoptees? What was going on? So I made it my business to start all kinds of studies and programs. I applied to Harvard after undergrad because I figured we were illegitimate anyway. And so I needed to go to a school that was very legitimate. And it was very convenient. I lived in Cambridge, there was Harvard, it was well known internationally. And if I did my work there, it was going to have more cachet than if I did it somewhere else where people would never have heard of it. So it was interesting. While I was at Harvard, my professors, and I had some great, I mean, I had Eric Erickson as one of my professors. I had great professors, but they didn't get me at all. They kept saying, there's no psychology of adoption, Joyce. I don't know what you think you're doing. And I would say, well, there is a psychology of adoption. I can tell you there is because I'm living it. And I think it's really important that we learn more about it and that we do more about it. So that's what got me going. And I did so many degrees. I have 2 masters and I have a dual doctorate from Harvard in 2 disciplines. And, you know, I make fun of myself and say it's because, you know, I needed to make sure that I was legitimate. But in fact, I wanted to make sure that adoption was legitimate and that people were paying attention to what we were doing. Long story short, I started clinics, I started programs. Really, nobody was doing anything clinically with adoption. My good friend Betty Jean Lifton, my good friend Annette Barron, they were doing a lot of writing, more on a sociological basis. But nobody at that point was doing very much in terms of clinical work with adoption. And obviously, there were people who, people in the adoption field who would vilify me saying, why do you want to make us look like we're sick? And I said, that's not my intention at all. My intention is to heal people and to give them some way of making sense of what's happened to them. They didn't have this as a, you know, part of what they grew with. It came to them because of an imposition by others. And so there was a lot going on that I felt was really, really important. And I started all these little programs and clinics, but the big program that I started was the Center for Family Connections, which was the only place of its kind in the country, because it had nothing to do with placement. I didn't want to have, I mean, I would go and speak to placement agencies and try to help them to understand a little more and to change their unethical practices. But I never wanted to have anything to do with placement. And so this clinic was unusual because, you know, where else would pre-adoptive parents go that they weren't being treated like, you know, they're very special and it's all about them? And where else would birth parents go where people would actually listen to them and understand and make sense of some of the experiences they were dealing with? The agencies didn't treat birth parents well, as you all know. And everyone, in order to do what was best for the child, which was my focus, you had to take care of all of the parents. And to this day, you know, there are people who have very differing views about what should and shouldn't happen in adoption. But as long as it is happening, I feel a sense of obligation to help the children and to give them whatever we can so that they can feel as whole as possible in the process of making sense of their lives in adoption. So anyway, there's so much more, but I feel like I'm rambling on. So I'm going to stop there and just say 2 or 3 things, and then feel free to ask me any questions. Feel free to bring up any concerns that you have. Some of you were on the last Zoom. And one of the important things that I think I shared is that everyone, and I used to say this to my interns and my staff all the time at the clinic, at the Center for Family Connections, there were 27 therapists. I worked very hard to make sure they were diverse in every way. I wanted kids to have therapists who resembled them in various ways. And I think it's extremely important. We had birth parents, adoptive parents, adoptees, foster parents, and people who had nothing to do with adoption, but were interested. And we had people of color, we had gay and lesbian therapists, we had a little bit of everything, and worked very hard to make sure that we had that. Now, the difficulty was people believe that their story is the center. And over and over again, I tried to tell people that your story is a case study of one. And it's not like everybody or anybody else's. And it's really important to know that, because you come into this thinking, oh, I'm going to find like-minded people, and generally you do, but everyone's story is very different. Everyone's experience is very different. Some people feel really good about their adoption, and that makes people who didn't feel really good about it angry and put that person down, because how could you feel good about such a horrible situation? But it's a case study of one. And some people find birth families that are open-armed and very accepting, and some people are rejected. There are numbers of different scenarios that everyone can come up against. And I think it's really important to realize that, and to give people the supports they need along the way. And the outcome of all of this, I think that search and reunion, the search is about a search for self. And I'll say this, and some people won't like it, it really doesn't matter what you find. It's that you find the truth, and that you sort it out and make sense for yourself. And really what that does to build your core and to make sense of your life for you is what's most important. And it's really hard for some people, and their life is so complicated, and it seems much easier for other people. But really finding out the truth has been kept from us. The secrets have clouded our lives. The BJ used to call it the deep sleep, and people call it the fog. There are so many different ways of looking at how we aren't fully aware of what's going on around us, and how we need that in the process. So anyway, these are the things I want you to keep in mind, and I'll sort of point them out as we talk about things. But let me stop here and see what you're thinking, and if you have any big questions, or whether you want to just get into some nitty-gritty.
Well, who wants to ask Joyce the first question? No
I
one's
see-
got their hand up, but I do see some comments.
I see Judith's hand is up, but she has her mute button on.
Oh, okay.
How do we unmute Judith?
Judith's gonna mute herself.
There she is.
There. Have you had a great deal of experience with people who, before they knew who their birth parents were, believed they were a different ethnicity?
Absolutely.
And then when they find out that they're a different ethnicity, how does that affect the reunion and self-concept?
Well, these are some of the things that are really wrong with the secrecy. And what I've learned over the years, Judith, is that often the adoptive parents were told these stories. This is like third-party information. And the older you are, from my generation, they didn't tell very much of anything to the adoptive parents. So they were making things up as they went along. And, I think that what we've learned is that we need to know more about the truth. And DNA has helped us with that. There are lots of things that have helped us with that. But it is not uncommon at all to be told something and then to find out that the story is completely wrong. Not just the ethnicity, not just the, you know, those kinds of stories, but even the story of what happened and who their birth father is, if they know the birth mother. And, you know, all of these things are done in a way that they're not always told in the honest way.
I was told by my adoptive mother that I was a certain ethnicity. And then in very rapid succession, I found out that my search angel had discovered who my birth father really was and that I had 2 half sisters. And everybody wanted to meet immediately, but they were a different ethnicity than I had been told. And I'm still back in the old camp. For 75 years, I had believed I was something else. And it didn't go very well.
Well, I think that's really hard when you don't have the support and the help to make sense of the story. I think it reminds me of when you're the searcher, when you're the one doing the searching, you're beginning to learn more and more about the story as you do your research. When you find the person you're searching for, they're out of the blue. They're just not prepared in the same way. So sometimes people don't respond quickly. This was true on your side, that you know, you weren't ready to deal because this wasn't your imaginary family. This wasn't what you had in your mind at all. And so you needed time, but they were probably hurt and upset that you weren't interested in them.
Well, I was interested, but it didn't feel like family.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
Well, you know, and this is one of my little quotes. I like certain quotes of mine, so I repeat them a million times. But one of my quotes that I like is, just because, okay, how do I say it exactly right? Just because you're related, it doesn't mean you have a relationship. I think that adoptees have this fantasy that they're going to find these people who are just like them, who totally get them, who look like them, and who are, you know, they're so connected to them. And really, when you find people, they're strangers. And it takes a while to develop a real relationship. It's not automatic. You don't just have a relationship because you're related. And I think if we step back and look at our adoptive family or our, you know, in-laws, or look at anyone else that we consider some kind of family, we can see that it took a while to make a relationship and to figure out what that relationship is with these folks.
Yeah, I have no concept of what those people feel about family because they've always had their family.
Right.
And right. I think they expected me to just be another family member.
Right, right.
And I don't really have, my family's almost all deceased, my adopted family. So they were all fired up. It's me who was really kind of lagging, but it took time. And we're still very different.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's not a given that you're going to be like people. And I think that's always a surprise. Because if you look on Facebook, adoptees are always posting pictures of themselves and their birth mother and saying, do I look like her? Do I look like him? And that's what we do because we didn't have mirrors growing up and we want to have them. But you don't always look like certain people. You might look like your great uncle who you know, you're not going to find. but that doesn't mean you're not part of that family. And I know what you mean. It's very difficult to sort of figure out how you fit in. And if you live far away, and if you have a different language, a different culture, a different ethnicity, it takes a different religion. It takes a while to sort of figure that out and to make sense of it.
Well, I don't want to take up all your time, but I'll just leave with this. Since I found this out, I look in the mirror and my face looks like a whole different shape. I look like a totally different person, and I could never figure it out before.
Right.
No matter how hard I looked, I couldn't tell what I looked like. I'd look at my photographs, I'd look in the mirror, I still couldn't tell. And I'm just beginning that the last 2 years.
Well, that's something that's that many adoptees talk about, not knowing what they look like. You don't see yourself in the mirror because you haven't had mirrors around you growing up. And it's more extreme for people who are transracially or internationally adopted, but it's the same. There's a level of that for all of us who are adopted, unless you're adopted in an open adoption or with other family members, maybe siblings placed together. Otherwise, you just really don't know what you look like. And there's a wonderful poem. Do any of you know Penny Callan Partridge? Penny's wonderful. She's an adoptee and an adopted parent, actually. And she is a great poet. I used to call her the poet laureate of adoption. We now have a lot of them. And one of her poems is quite wonderful, and it's about mirrors. And I'll find it and send it to Marcy and Jennifer so they can make it available to you. It's really quite wonderful. So other questions, and Darren, I love your kitty.
Yes, Joyce, I have one. There's a couple in the comment section here that they wanted me to ask.
Okay.
As you first started your fact gathering for yourself, what was or has been a profound, important evidence of you? Is it,
I don't think I understand exactly what you're asking. Help me out.
so when you were doing your fact gathering, what was the important or profound thing that you uncovered that was the evidence of you, who you were, sort of gave you your sense of identity?
Well, I think it took a while to get to that. I think that, you know, there were steps along the way. I found it fascinating to know what my name had been. I found it fascinating to see the story from the hospital records of what happened. I found it fascinating as I went along meeting various people. I met an aunt who's only 6 years older than me, and she was sent to get help the day that I was born because my birth mother didn't tell anyone that she was pregnant. And so the day that I was born, I'm sorry, I keep being distracted. There's some, the day that I was born, she was told by my grandmother that my mother was having appendicitis. So there was a story about me being the appendix. So there were all these interesting things that I learned along the way. And I really think, you know, some people find that their birth parents are deceased and they feel that's the end of the story. Mine weren't deceased, but I found out more and more and more about my family of origin from all my other relatives that I met along the way. And, you know, there are things that you learned. There are multiple realities. So everyone has a different story, which doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means from their viewpoint, they believe a certain thing or saw things in a certain way. And I think that's very, very helpful to learn more about who you are and how you came to be yourself in the midst of all of that.
Thank you. One other question that's here in the chat that they wanted me to ask from you. Do agencies lie to us? Do they withhold the truth?
Agencies lie all the time. And, you know, people in agencies, I mean, they're telling a story that is a third-party story. You know, they'll take the story that the birth mother tells them, which may not be the true story. She may be changing it to protect someone or for whatever reason. And then they'll take that story and recreate it in a different way. So there are many, many ways that stories evolve and that they're not exactly the story that you think you should know. And agencies, you know, they lie about records being burnt. How many fires could there possibly be in adoption agencies around the world? And how many, I mean, it's preposterous that, that this is what happens. But, you know, people feel worried that they'll be exposed in a certain way. I was once asked to give a keynote on ethics in adoption, and I laughed. You know, I think adoption is just not very ethical. It's not done in a way that is really carefully done in an honest and ethical way. We will always have adoption. There will always be situations where kids cannot be raised in their family of origin. And they need to be in a family because that's the best way to grow up, not in a group home or in a, you know, institution. So I think that we need to look at this in a different way. A lot of adoption through the foster system and internationally is really just child trafficking. It's a way to provide children to people who want a family. It isn't a way, my other famous quote is, adoption should be about finding families for children, not about finding children for families. And really that's what happens a lot of the time. So I think ethically we're doing it all wrong. I think we need to change so many things about adoption. I don't even like the word adoption. I think that we should all be stepchildren. In a divorce, you get to keep your parents and you add step parents. Well, I think that's true in foster care, in adoption. I think we're all stepchildren and we all have birth families and then we all have, you know, families that we grow up with. I just think that adoption is another word for, I feel like I'm going to break into a Bob Dylan song or something, but adoption is it's a way to claim someone. It has to do with the legal aspect. And all women and children are possessions in the legal system. And that's what adoption does. It makes you a possession. And I think that is not in anybody's best interest. So I'd like to see us do major changes and renovations in adoption going forward. And as I started this, there will always be adoption. There will be situations where children need to be raised in a different family. But they shouldn't be closed adoptions. They should be open adoptions. I always loved, I did a lot of work in Hawaii in the 80s, and Hawaii and New Zealand both have the same roots, native roots. And, you know, the way they always did adoptions, they were open. It was an open event where a child was given to another family in the same way that marriages happened, to increase the connections within the community and the resources. And it was all out in the open. There was no secrecy. And you knew who your birth family was. They became your aunt and uncle. Their role changed, but you knew who they were. And I think all of that is, is really something we should take a look at and think about. Ancient cultures knew what they were doing. We keep making mistakes. So Jen.
Yeah, Sarah Easterly had a really good question for you about the title of this and how that applies. And then after that, it's Michael Knox, and then Holly, and then Lynn. So I've got 4 queued up for you.
Okay. So Sarah, where are you? I'm looking for you.
I'm not on camera, so I apologize. I'm in the car on a field. So you just hear my disembodied voice, but thank you. I love this talk. I loved the first one as well. And I'm just staying on the title, putting yourself back together after reunion, tall order. And then the other piece is putting others back together after reunion. And I know, there's there's probably some adoptee wanting to take care of everybody dynamics going on. But I also recognize that those of us who have done the searching have a bit of a head start in unpacking things and looking at our trauma and our grief and wading through it, or starting, not necessarily what's our, and I'm thinking about birth relatives, but I'm also thinking about adoptive relatives. Like, are there psychologically ways, especially for those who kind of came out, I'm a baby scoop adoptee. So, when for sure shame and secrecy prevailed and not talking about things, as you were talking about in your generation as well. But like bringing things out in the open in a gentle way without traumatizing them or just being too much. I mean, are there good ways to go about that, or is that just not our business?
I think there are good ways to go about it, but I think, it's my thing about the case study of one. I don't think anyone can give you a template and say, this is what you need to do, and this is how you're going to resolve your trauma and your loss and your grief. Because I think we're all very different, and we're all, put together in very different ways. And some of us have had cumulative trauma after trauma after trauma, and some of us haven't. And so, I think that it's very individual, and it's really important to find therapists who are aware and who understand the complexity of adoption and of trauma. And it used to be very hard to do that. When I started my clinics, really that's what I was aiming for, because there really weren't very many people who were knowledgeable in these ways. And I think it's so important for people to have the right kind of help. It reminded me when I was doing this work early on, I kept thinking in the 1980s, family systems and family therapy was sort of new. And people would say, people would be asked, oh, do you use family systems orientation? Are you a family systems therapist? And 90% of therapists would say, oh, yes, I work with families. Well, being a systemic therapist doesn't mean you're just sitting in a family session. You need to understand the underpinnings. You need to understand, how this family operates. You need to be able to work with this family in different ways. To really do family therapy, you have to have a lot of education and understanding. It's not just a matter of sitting down with a family. And the same thing started happening in the 80s, and even in the late 70s when I was doing this work. with people who would be asked, oh, do you see adoption related cases? 95% of them would say, oh yes, I've seen adoptees and adoptive parents, and I do this and I do that. Well, that doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean a thing. It doesn't mean that you understand the underpinnings, the way that families are formed. Have you been able to sit with birth families? Have you been able to sit with pre-adoptive families? Have you been with children who are adopted? Have you been with adult adoptees looking back on their lives? Unless you have a real understanding of all of the complexities of adoption, you're really not adoption competent. And I think that's the problem. When we had our clinic, this was interesting. The adoptive parents, and some of these adoptive parents were amazing and really were working so hard to make a difference in the lives of their kids, and it's really what they wanted to have happen. And one of the things that so many parents would come into our clinic and say is, and this is the correct number, we went to at least 7 therapists before we found anyone who really understood our family and understood our child. 7. Can you imagine the waste of time and money going to 7 different therapists who do not get it and who are not helping your child or your family, who are probably pathologizing your child and or your family? And, that's what's wrong. You add to the trauma for these people if you're not giving them some kind of support in the process of making sense of their lives. So I won't go on and on and on. Who's next, Marcia? Michael?
And then
Hey there. Hey, thanks for the call. This is great. It's a question both for you and the adoptees, but at 58, I had done Ancestry like 10 years ago, and I did 23andMe a couple of years ago because I'm kind of a health nut, and I won't say I wasn't searching, I was always curious. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, if you had asked me before, I didn't care that I was adopted. And out of the blue, I found a half brother, which turned into basically my whole biological family, including my birth mother. And this is reunion. My birth mother, half sister and half brother maternal side, and 4 brothers and a sister on the father's side, and he passed away. And I can say I was searching, but I wasn't searching. And then I thought I went crazy. I didn't care about adoption, and all I care about is adoption now.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is it, it's been 2 years. Everything has been as best as I could want, but I'm just wondering, am I the only guy that has gone? I've heard podcasts with a couple of people that have gone through it, but I didn't care about adoption. Now I sit on a Zoom call listening to adoption stories. So I would love your input, and anybody else out there, kind of thing. Things are good, but just looking for answers.
I think there's an obsession that we have around the search. The search makes you obsessed with finding things out. And it's because you've had so many years without any answers, without any information, and then all of a sudden you're a detective and you're finding these things. And in your case, I think DNA revs that up a little too, because it fast forwards you into it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's like you are obsessed and you need to fill in the blanks of the things that you didn't have, and you're trying to put them into place, and you're trying to assess yourself against your fellow adoptees. So you're on these Zooms and you're doing all of this. I think all of that is completely normal and typical. What I would say is at some point, remember that you're not just adopted. You know, I think this is a very important thing for all of us. Really make sure that you have friends who have nothing to do with adoption, that you have interests that have nothing to do, that you read some things that have nothing to do with adoption. Every once in a while, remember the other sides of yourself, because they're pretty wonderful also. And you need to figure out how to integrate your past with your present so you can have the best kind of future.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is perfect, because I had a ton of interests, including my own children, and I do Ironman triathlons and all of that garbage, and that was my life. And all of a sudden, for the last 2 years, I find myself deep in this rabbit hole, and so yeah, maybe I need to refocus some of my efforts back to what I had before it.
And you don't need to choose either or, but you need to mingle them a little and make sure that you're paying attention to the other parts of yourself.
Fantastic. That helps. Thanks.
Okay.
Holly is up next, and Lynn follows Holly.
Okay. Hi, Holly.
Hi, Joyce.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Okay, so here's my question. My reunions didn't go well. And as I have heard you say, the searcher takes on the burden of the relationship.
Yep.
And these are really great people, some of them. And I, at the moment in time when I understood what you said about being the keeper of this gate, I don't want to be the person who keeps these relationships alive and going. So I've stepped off of that merry-go-round, and there's absolutely no communication except for, once or twice a year, maybe from a few. So my question would be, so now how do I actually put myself back together? I mean, I had a real life before this. I've had all of this pain, and now I have to go on, and I'd like to leave the pain behind.
Well, okay. I see you on Facebook, Holly, and I see that you're with your horses and your dogs, and you're doing all of the Holly things that are an integral part of your life. And so that's great. And, the thing about your connection to your birth family and being, connected but not, I don't know how to say this because I know it's going to be misconstrued by people, and I know this is going to sound weird. So I'm going to say it anyway. You don't need all those people. This is about a search for yourself. And if you've gone through this and you find people that, you said some of them are fine people, but you don't feel like being the one to juggle them. And, that's fine. That's your choice. There's no more secrecy and lies. Well, there probably are a little bit here and there because every family has them, even birth families, alas. But basically, you're doing all the work to put yourself back together, and you're making the choices as you go along. And that's great. That's great. I think people have a fictional idea of how it should be and how it should look and what should happen. And that's just not how it is. It's different. And one of the things that I remember having this aha moment a million years ago, where I realized that, I didn't fit in either of my families, and I fit in both. So to elaborate a little bit, there's parts of me that are, you know, my memories growing up are in my adoptive family. And I'm in the pictures, I remember the events, I have all those memories, all of that. And yet I didn't feel like I belonged some of the time, even though it was, you know, a nice family, it was good, things were great. And then I find my birth family, and, you know, there are many things that are alike. There are some things that are strikingly similar, but I don't belong. I don't have a history there. When they get together and talk about their growing up, I don't have that memory. I don't have that place. So I think there's a way that you belong, but you don't belong in both families. And there's a way that you think you should belong in your birth family. And the reality is, you know, sometimes you find a person that you absolutely connect with in either of your families, and sometimes you don't. But I think the most important thing is finding yourself and really figuring out who you are in the midst of this and what you need to make yourself whole. Jennifer?
Yeah. You know, I was looking to be included and loved. And all I've gotten out of this is I can disconnect better than the average bear.
Yeah.
And that's not what I think I went out looking for.
No.
So do you think it's too hopeful to hope that these relationships will continue over time? Because my fear is that the majority of us are talking about reunions that don't last till the end of their lives.
Well, here's the thing. What Holly said in the beginning, and I always say this to people, is the searcher is always the initiator. So, and I think it's annoying because you feel like, why don't these people call me? What the hell? Why am I the one who has to do this all the time? But really, if you started it, it's your thing. They can fall right back into their life without you. And it's not a meanness. It's not a bad thing. I think, Jenny, are you the one that just asked that? Yeah. I think I've gone out of my way. My family, a lot of them live sort of near me, and they're an Irish Boston family, and there's Sunday dinner almost every Sunday. And even though I might prefer to do something else, I've made sure that I go as often as possible to feel more normalized in the process, and it has worked. But not everybody can do that. Not everyone lives that close. Not everyone can make those things happen. I think it's very complicated, and that's why it's a case study of one, and every story is different. How are we doing with time, Jennifer?
We're good. We have 32 minutes. Lynn Grubb is up, and then after that, it's Amy Ball.
Okay. Where's Lynn? Hi, Lynn.
Hi, Joyce. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Good to see you. I'm so glad I came. This has been really helpful. I'm not really in reunion at the moment, even though I found my birth father last year. But I did have a question that kind of relates to the other question about agencies lying. In your experience, because I do searches for other adoptees and people of unknown parentage, I've looked at a lot of non-ID over the years, and I came from the cradle, and I've helped other cradle babies, we're called, right, Michael? Have you heard that term, cradle baby? I've heard that, or I've seen their non-ID, and there's a lot of information on fathers and the father's relatives. In my case, the social worker that was assigned to my case said that my father's name wasn't in the file. And I was just curious if you come across that often, and if you know why that is and why there's so much inconsistency.
Well, of course, I don't know why that is in each case.
Absolutely.
But
I mean, in general.
Something general that I know is true And you're in the what, 40-ish years old?
Oh, thank you. No, I was born in 1965.
Okay. So I think what how to put this? Well, one of the unethical things that agencies did, and probably still do, I don't know, is, you know, they really didn't want to deal with the father. The birth mother was a captive audience. She was right there with the prize, the baby. And so she was the one they were working with. The birth father was a bit of a nuisance, because what if he and his family wanted to keep the child, and then you don't have this lovely baby for this nice family that's been waiting in line. So there was a tendency over many, many years to not to lie about who the father was, to, you know, there was a thing you had to post in a newspaper to say that there was this baby. And agencies back in the 70s and 80s and way before that, I'm sure, used to post in disparate places where this guy probably never set foot. And plus the fact, who reads the newspaper and reads the fine print of who's, I mean, this is ridiculous. So I think it was in the best interest of facilitating an adoption to not put very much about the birth father in there. Then there was also the birth mother keeping the secret of who the birth father was, not wanting her family to know she was with a married man, or not wanting her family to know she was with someone of another religion, or not wanting her family to know that she was raped. I mean, there are so many different reasons, but the agencies were very happy to go along with not knowing, because it just made it easier to facilitate an adoption.
Okay, well, I helped a girl who was born 2 months before me, and she's got massive amounts of information about her father's family, but I don't.
Uh-huh.
So I suspect it's because my birth mom didn't want to name him.
Yeah.
And for one or all of the reasons you mentioned. But I just want to hear your perspective, since you've talked to so many people.
Yeah, there are so many different stories, but basically what it comes down to is either the birth mother guarding herself against that information being out, or the agency protecting themselves and making sure they have an adoption happening.
All right, thanks, Joyce.
Who's next? Jennifer?
Amy Ball.
Amy, let's
Hi.
see. Amy, hi.
This is, I feel like I'm with my people. So I am about a year post reunion that happened through DNA, because the traditional agencies were not fruitful. I was a private adoption. I was handed over in a parking lot when I was 3 days old, and my adoptive parents actively tried to keep information from me and recruited other family members as well. When I did find out the story, I found out that I had, of the 6 half siblings, I have 1 remaining alive. Both birth parents are dead. And I'm in touch with my brother, and I'm in touch with the 7 nieces and nephews, most of whom are much older than I am, from my sister Amy, which is creepy, same name. What I'm finding is that, as you know, initially there was like that honeymoon phase where I was very obsessed, finding the information, plotting things out. And now I find that I'm grieving a lot. I'm grieving for the shared history that I don't have with these people. And the one adoptive brother that I did have he's been a missing person for 30 years. So I don't have anyone with a shared history now. And so I'm grateful that I found them and they've embraced me, and we are slowly developing a relationship. But I don't know what to do with those other feelings. And I don't know if there's like, you know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has like the 5 stages, if that's like applicable here. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, how do you identify a therapist who specializes in this?
Well, you know, it is important, and you can use Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's motif. You can use any of those things, but I think it's a really good thing, Amy, that you're grieving. What happens to us is we're sort of frozen in time as we're growing up, and we don't have any of this information, and we're just sort of there. And the fact that you can now feel the loss and see these things, it's not fun. But it's real and it's important, and you'll go through it and you'll come out the other side. It won't go away completely because it's part of your story, but the intensity of it that you're feeling right now will change a bit over time. And the second part, there are some really good groups on Facebook of adoptees who are therapists. Now, I have to say, I have no idea if some of them are any good or if they just are a therapist who is an adoptee. And I mean, there are some that I know by reputation are excellent, but there are others that I don't have any idea. You just have to interview people. You have to, I did a workshop in Indiana a few years ago about how to find an adoption therapist or how to be an adoption therapist. And if I can find it, we can repost it or do something with it. It's, you know, the kinds of things you should ask someone. You really want to make sure they've done a ton of reading, that they've seen all clients in the constellation, not just their own type. You know, I do think it's an advantage to be an adoptee and a therapist, because as long as you are able to be thoughtful about both birth parents and adoptive parents to make sense of the whole. I think sometimes it's hard if you're a birth parent or an adoptive parent therapist to, like for instance, Nancy Verrier wrote a beautiful book, and it's, you know, really highly renowned. She is an adoptive parent, and, you know, some of the things in there, you know that that's true. But if you're her client and you don't know that, how does that impact you? So these are just things I think you need to figure out so that you find yourself someone who really can work with you in the best possible way. Now, Janet is one of the really good therapists. I can't see what she said, but she's popping up here. Janet, where are you?
I'm right here, Joyce. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well.
Would you add something to this?
Sure. I would also add that just because the therapist is an adoptee, like Joyce said, doesn't mean that they're going to be competent in working with the trauma of adoption. It may be that they've had a different experience than you have had as an adoptee. So I always encourage people to find a therapist that is trauma informed and recognizes adoption as trauma. Great. Even more so than being an adoptee.
Right.
Thank you.
I think that's good.
Joyce, there are a few others on here in this group, but you can also go to our website, which I dropped in, which is naapunited.org/resources. We have a nationwide listing with it's at a click here link. Now those people are self-reporting that they're adoption competent, but then we have a list Of course, it starts off with Joyce on this list. But there's some really good people, and a lot of them are, I think, are already in this call tonight, and their names are on our website. But if anybody wants to message, it's a therapist here that wants to direct message or anything, go ahead and drop that in the comments in the chat.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, what's most important is for you to find someone that works for you. And so, and I really think it's a great idea to interview several people. When I used to have the clinic, one of the things I really liked about it, the reason it's probably closed is because it wasn't very cost effective, the way I did things. The way to train people is to train them in the room with you. And that means you can't charge twice for that session. So there were all these kinds of conflicts and ethical issues that were difficult. But I think that one of the things that's important is to interview people, like especially teens and young adults that I would work with. I would give them at least two, maybe three different opportunities to interview some of our therapists. Because you could be the best therapist in the world, but if I remind you of your fourth grade teacher who you hated, we're not going to get a lot of work done, because you're going to spend time feeling, you know, some feelings about that. So really it's individual, and for you to go and interview people and get a sense of them, you're going to find someone that you feel a connection to and that you think you can work with. And I think that's important.
Sounds good. Nancy, you had an interesting question about siblings. If you would like to ask Joyce that.
Yes, Joyce, thank you so much. This has been so helpful and insightful. So I found out I was adopted in 1991, and I was 37 years old. Closed adoption, didn't know. So I was obsessed and found my birth mother and 4 half siblings, of which one I felt like I had known all my life instantly. And the other 3 that we've met, it's been fine, but we've not stayed in touch with each other. So that's a long time, and I don't feel any need. But just 2 years ago, I found my birth father because of DNA ancestry. And now I've got 2 half siblings and 1 deceased one on his side. And all of a sudden I go from a family of 2 to a family of 8, right? And that feels weird, but because I don't know how to do that. But I think this most recent discovery, I clicked really fast with my half sister. She's much closer proximity. And so she's been coming up a lot and every opportunity to be with me. And it's been really good, but I feel like the honeymoon is kind of coming to a close because I'm seeing the differences in us as well as a few similarities, but a lot of differences. And it's just, you know, how much of my life do I want to invest in this relationship? She wants it closer than I do, but she doesn't understand how I feel as an adoptee. It gets really complicated. So I wondered if you had suggestions for, you know, how to set boundaries in a way that I don't want to end the relationship or ruin the relationship.
Well,
but I also want to protect a little space here.
Sure. I think in the beginning, there's an affair-like quality.
Yeah.
Church. There really is. And you know, when you're first in love and exploring someone, you are like attached at the hip and you want to be with them every hour. And you know, what a wonderful thing if there's a pandemic and you get stuck together. It's like fabulous. So all of that is true in the beginning, but then life must go on. And you can't be together all the time, and you have to go your separate ways and do your separate things. I think the best thing to do, I've found with many clients, is to have a conversation about it and to say, in no way do I want you to think that I'm, you know, I'm tired of our relationship or that we're changing it in a certain way. I'm just noticing that the intensity of our relationship in the beginning can't sustain itself. No, marriage is nothing, you don't keep going like that. You end up having parallel play and doing things together and apart. It's just, it's just important to figure out how to develop this next phase of the relationship, and to talk about that, like set some boundaries, set some limits, and have her set some limits. Like, do you think we should get together once every 6 weeks? Or do you think we should talk on the phone, once a month or once a week? Work it out together and figure it out. I think obviously she's important to you, and you're very important to her. She finds you very unique and interesting, and so she's a little more in love with you than you are with her, if you take the analogy of the that piece. But I think basically you want to continue to develop the relationship. You just want it to go in a direction that's more realistic.
That is a wonderful recommendation. Thank you. And I just want to add one piece that, and maybe this is for another time, but the other reverse side of it is I feel guilty about my about my birth brother, in my adoptive family, because I'm talking to my new half sibling twice a week. And I talk to him about once every 6 months. And it's always been that way.
That's how it's always been. That's what's real for you guys. I think, you could go and have a chat with him and just say, it's so interesting. You and I share such a history, and I don't have that with these other folks, but I'm trying to learn what I do have. And so I'm a little fixated on them right now. And I just want you to know that you'll always be my brother. I think that's a normal relationship for you. For him, your relationship with him is authentic.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh, thank you. That's really helpful.
How are we doing? We're getting close.
We have about 14 minutes. I do have a question someone asked me to read to you. Okay. And I know it's going to apply to a lot of people in the room tonight. Adoptees often write memoir. Why? We have a lot of authors in this room.
Yeah. We had an adoptee dinner. What's today? Tuesday, Sunday. Every once in a while, a bunch of people in the Boston, Cambridge area, and if other people are visiting, we have an adoptee dinner. So the other night we had an adoptee dinner, and there was a new young transracial adoptee who was there, and she was talking about writing her memoir. And the other two of the other people there had written their memoirs. So, I think writing your story is very therapeutic. It's sort of like journaling. I don't think you have to publish everything. I think, right now, because people can self-publish and there's all these different options, I think for some people, it actually isn't a great idea to make it available. What I always think of, did anyone ever read the book or see the movie about Antoine Fisher? You remember this? Yeah. So I was invited when the film came out to facilitate a conversation at the end of the movie with Antoine Fisher and one of the stars. I forget who. It wasn't Denzel. I wish it was. But anyway, it was, it was this event, and there were millions of, DCF had sent a lot of foster kids and adopted kids who were either in the system in foster care or in DYS. And so that's who the audience was. And I started facilitating the conversation at the end of the movie, and these kids were tough. They had lived tough lives, and they had tough questions. And they asked Antoine, what was it like when you were sexually abused and you I mean, really, really direct questions. And I could tell I had to sort of protect him a little bit, because although he had written this book and although he had made this movie, he really wasn't prepared to answer some of these questions. And these kids knew too much about him. And that's the thing. You have to be very careful who's getting this information about you and how they're going to use it. You have to be careful how your families by birth and by adoption are going to see this and how they're going to use it. It's pretty complicated business. And I think it's extremely therapeutic to write, but I'm just not always sure that it should be published or shared in the ways that it is by some people. And I've worked with so many people who wrote something that they felt, you know, that's my voice, I needed to write that. And 10 years later, they wish they had never done it, because now they couldn't be who they are. They were always who they were in the eyes of people who had read their book. And so I think it's pretty complicated. I remember, you know, I was very close to B.J. Lifton, and her book that a lot of people haven't read, Twice Born. It was one of her first books, and it's very memoirish, and it tells a lot about her story. And she decided after that she wasn't going to write. I mean, all of her other books are about, you know, they're more macro. They're more literature, and they're different. They're not about herself as much. And I just would warn people to pay attention to who is your audience, why are they your audience, why do you feel the need to do this, and maybe you'll get to that point, but first figure out who you are and what you're getting out of it, how you're using this as a, you know, it's journaling.
So Joyce, we have a comment in here, and for those of you who don't know, not only is Joyce a wonderful supporter of our organization, she speaks at our conferences, and she is also a senior advisory member to our organization, along with some other wonderful people. But the question is that can we connect you with colleagues or continuing ed groups so therapists get training on adoptees and the adoption triad? Might this be something your organization can help facilitate or encourage? So yes, we are doing that, and it's actually part of the senior advisories discussions that they have had. Is like, what is an adoption therapist, competent therapist, and how do we ensure that? How do we train people? So if you want to speak to that a little bit about, Joyce, and how we can do better at this.
Well, you know, I forget how many years ago, the years just fly by, but Gary Mallon, who's a professor at Hunter Graduate School of Social Work, and I wrote, we had federal funding, a ton of federal funding that was fabulous. And we wrote a curriculum and taught a postgraduate course in adoption competency at Hunter Graduate School of Social Work. And it was really, really excellent. It ran for about 4 years, and it was a year-long course. We met in New York once a month from Thursday through Sunday, and we went over all kinds of different things, and it was terrific. I wish that we could figure out the funding and a university that would host something like that again, because we need more structured, and I know there are programs out there where they do something, and pieces of what we taught were used in another federal project. The problem is it doesn't go deep enough. To me, you can sit in 1 million workshops and classes, and that's great. And you can read 1 million books, and you can watch a lot of the films that adoptees make, and that's all wonderful. But I think if you don't have really good supervision, And if you don't have, you know, someone really working with you to process some of what you're doing, and who knows, that's the other thing, you need adoption competence supervisors and trainers. And there are more and more of these folks coming along, which is great. But I think that's what we need to do, is to figure out how to make sure that we have a lot of really good supervision for therapists who are, you know, trying to put it all together, but maybe need some support along the way.
Excellent, thank you. And we appreciate how you advise us, and we're working on trying to come up with a solution for that. Christy had made a comment that I thought was kind of interesting about the cycle. And that, you know, that happened to me too. My girls were the ones to break the cycle, but you know, your generations of women are losing children in your biological family. Kind of, what is the psychology behind it? Why does that happen? How do we stop that?
Well, you know, I have a very unique way of working with people from the start, and we do a crazy intake, and then we do a genogram. And I really love to do a 3-generation genogram and look at the patterns in a family. And there are patterns in every family. And if you don't acknowledge them and change them, they continue on to the next generation. And so I think these are some of the ways that we need to really look at things and figure out what's going on and think about how to change things. There's a longer answer to that, but it's late, so I won't go in.
Well, and I think some of it too is, like, for my mother, it was the small town judge who was the moral authority. He took me away from her. By the time I was 16 and was pregnant in that situation, it was societal pressure. It was the church, you know, you cannot be a single mother. You've shamed your family. My girls got pregnant before they were married, and they were scared to death to tell me, and they told me, and I'm like, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Marry the boy, don't marry the boy. It doesn't matter. Congratulations for having a baby. And you know, so it's a societal change too in what's acceptable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Joyce, I cannot thank you enough. And to let everyone know, we're going to be back in July. Joyce is going to consult her calendar because this would be falling
it's
on
the July week. I don't know. We may bump it up another week, and we'll get back with the date.
Yeah. And just to let you know, some other things that we have going on. I mean, we have we do, and Marcy's on here if she wants to take herself off mute and talk about Adoption Happy Hour and who her guest is this Friday. Or did I lose her?
No, I'm here. Thank you, Jen. Yes, this week we have Nathan Ross. He's a therapist and a national child welfare consultant and an author of, I don't think we have the title of the book in here, but he's also written a book, and we're really super excited to meet him this Friday night. So we'll hope you will be able to join us and go ahead and get registered.
He's great. He's really wonderful.
Yeah,
so I
highly recommend it. Yeah.
Yeah, he seems very, very special, and everybody seems to love him. The other thing that we, mention and talk about here is that we are having a conference. We are having whoops, got to get the picture switched. Wrong one. Try this over here. So we're having a conference in Indianapolis on September 10th and 11th. Let me see if I can get the right image to show. We would love it if you could attend in person. We are actually going to be meeting in person. David Bull will be our Friday opening keynote, and then Melanie Yehi Chung Sherman will be our Saturday keynote. We have tons of great workshops. We have Brian Stanton, who's going to be showing his film at Ghost Kingdom. We've talked about BJ Lifton quite a bit here tonight, and she's the one that coined that phrase, so that's very appropriate. And for those of you who cannot do that, We also have we're working on the details of getting it all worked out. We will have a virtual option as well. So we appreciate everyone being here. Have a great rest of the month. And we will post as soon as Joyce consults her calendar, and we will be back in July.
Great. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.